All right, so my name is Kelsey Cooperman, and I am a fifth year graduate doctoral student in counseling psychology here at the University of Oregon. And this is my fourth year. I'm completing my fourth year at the UO Accessible Education Center as an ongoing support counselor. And today we have a workshop called Navigating Our New Normal, Strategies for Maximizing Remote Learning and Working from Home. And so while we're in this difficult context of the pandemic, and really these are strategies that we could use at other points in our lives as well if we're in a situation where we need to work from home. These will hopefully be some tools, strategies that you can take with you to help you as you navigate this challenging situation. So we'll talk through some challenges of the current pandemic situation, in particular with how we are working from home, how our routines have been disrupted, what we're having to deal with right now, and how to still get through the rest of this term. So we'll talk about remote learning, working from home, like really how to set up the home environment to help you. And we'll talk about routines, time management strategies. Again, those will apply to other contexts as well, and screen fatigue, which is something that we're all likely experiencing to some degree now that we're staring at our computers all the time instead of that face-to-face contact. So first, remote learning. This is a very strange and difficult time, right? All of our routines, like I mentioned, were abruptly disrupted. There are more distractions than ever. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you are taking a class and you're sitting on your couch, rather than being in a classroom where there are much fewer distractions, there's the whiteboard, there's the instructor, there may be some distractions with other folks or their computers, but overall distractions are fairly minimized within that environment. You might be sitting on your couch at home now, looking at all those books that you have been wanting to read that are sitting on your shelf, or that guitar that's sitting there that you really want to be playing, or oh, I need to water my plants. Whatever it is, there are a lot more distractions than usual in our home environments, and which are now our learning environments. And so just want to name that challenge that's very real during this situation. There are increased barriers, a lot of fear and worries, concerns folks have about the pandemic and about challenges and fears that are coming up around all of the current context, worrying about family members, whatever that might be. Also increased responsibilities at home. Now maybe folks are needing to also make sure their kids are tracking what they're supposed to be doing, learning, staying on top of their schoolwork, while also staying on top of their own schoolwork, or maybe needing to take care of parents during that process. And so just want to name that there's a lot going on right now. And it's challenging to learn during this time. We need a lot of self-directed motivation and drive, which is also fairly low right now. Again, we're distracted, we're thinking about other things. Maybe just the fact that there's not as much of a routine or structure, like the external structure, that can really decrease our motivation and can make everything, time kind of feels like it blurs together, which makes it really difficult to get motivated, get started on tasks. So just to say, we are not at our optimal level of functioning whatsoever right now. And so even as we talk through different strategies and techniques to try to pace ourselves and manage our time and get through this term, I still want to name that there's a certain level of self-compassion that needs to be present for us to be able to deal with the current context and get through this term. So what are some of the challenges you're facing? Maybe it is, I just want you to think about this. Maybe it's that you have a pet at home, and when you're trying to learn, your pet is trying to get you to throw a ball for them, or trying to get you to cuddle with them, or somehow that's really distracting. And like I said, there are concerns and worries that folks have that can be very distracting during this time. Maybe you're in a different time zone and you're trying to learn at a totally different time of day that's not typical for you, maybe even like 8 p.m. Something like that might be really hard. So think about the different specific challenges that you've been facing and how these strategies might apply very specifically to you and your current situation. So working from home, I'm sure that many of us have slippers on, maybe our feet are even kicked up right now. There are definitely some silver lining aspects of working from home. Comfort's one of them. But does this look familiar to anyone? Does maybe your desk space, your workspace start to look like this? Not even just during the pandemic, but in general, this can happen. This definitely happens to me. I'm looking at a pile of papers on my desk right now. So this is really common. And unfortunately, things really start to pile up when we get into our work, we're focusing on other things, but those piles that collect on our desk can be very distracting. It's kind of like something in your environment just yelling at you, like, take care of me, you know, sort through me, throw this thing away, whatever it might be. And so when we have those distractors in our environments yelling at us, it takes away from what we're trying to focus on, of course. So when we think about setting up the environment for success, we want to have a dedicated workspace, if possible. For some folks, your workspace is also your dining table, which is also your socializing table right now, where you do like FaceTime with friends or whatever it might be. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute, but if possible, see if you can create a dedicated workspace that is just for work. Take time to really get that organized. Clear off that clutter. And especially if you did this in the beginning of this term or over spring break and it was feeling really good, I'm sure that by now or at different points in the term, things start to pile up again. And so whether it's in the very start of something or partway through or even towards the end, it's worth it to set aside that time and get organized, clear off that clutter, reduce those distractions in that workspace specifically. Think about, is it helpful to be near a window, or is that really distracting? Do I find myself daydreaming a lot? And think through, how do I, once I reduce that clutter, how do I keep it cleared off? How do I not pile the clutter back up? I try to make rules for myself, like, okay, once I clear this off, I'm not allowed to just put a random piece of paper or a piece of mail on this desk. Then a pile might, show up somewhere else in my home environment, but at least it's not in my workspace. So create a space that you actually want to be in. This is part of clearing off the clutter. As much as we might feel like we don't mind that clutter, it can sometimes feel overstimulating. It can feel just like unsettling. And so trying to create a really comfortable and motivating environment that's also, maybe you can play with some ergonomics that also is comfortable physically, not only just mentally or emotionally, like see if you can, is there a way for you to prop up your computer so that you don't have to look down the whole time, or make sure that you have a comfortable enough chair, or maybe a space where you could stand and work, but get comfortable. When our workspace feels good, we're much more likely to be able to get focused, get motivated, and get into that zone that can be really hard to get into. And so try to reserve that space for work only. If you're like me, you live in a really small space, or maybe you share an apartment with other people, and so the only space that you can focus is in your own bedroom, at your own desk, that also, like I said, can serve for a lot of different purposes. See if you can do what one of my students had talked about previously as costume changes. So this is the concept where when it's time to work, you get out your pencil case or your cup that has all your pens and pencils in it. You take out your laptop and your mouse, and maybe you put your glasses on, something to make the entire environment feel like, okay, it's time to work, right? Then work is done. Put all those things away. See if you can store those things somewhere else. And now it's dinner time. See if you can take out like a placemat, a coaster, something to make it feel like, you have your little napkin, maybe even your utensils, something to make it now feel like a dining room space. And then it's time to socialize. Put away the placemat and coaster and everything. And maybe now you take out like a framed photo and you put it on your desk with a cute little plant or whatever. It might sound silly, but if you can make that one same space feel really different for the different tasks that you're doing, it can help reserve that space when it's time to work. Your brain can kind of associate it with your actual environment, and it might be easier to get into the zone and get going. Setting boundaries. This is a big one while we're working from home. So needing to protect your workspace and your work time. Boundaries are really healthy. They can be hard to set, but they're so critical. And so whether it is taking a do not disturb sign, this little sticky note that you put on the outside of your workspace so that the rest of your family or your roommates or whoever might be there knows, okay, you know, so-and-so is in the zone, they're working, I'm not going to disturb them unless it's an emergency. Let others know that it's your work time. I know some people like to share their calendar with their family or close friends, their Google Calendar, whatever it might be, and that helps people know, okay, I'm not going to call during this time. So it might even be folks who are not in your physical space, but who might contact you or assume that you're available. You need to try to block off that time and say, you know, let's talk later, but from noon to 4, I'm going to be doing work. So sharing your calendars is a really great option. And I want you to think of anything else that you have tried that we can kind of talk through at the end of this presentation to see if maybe it's worked for you at one moment, but then it kind of stopped working and you're needing to revamp your system. We can talk through those, but really thinking about how do you set up this quiet zone. Maybe you play light music and that's how people know that it's time for you to work, or maybe that's when it's silent. When the music comes on, that means you're done working. Whatever cues in your environment can be really helpful. So building healthy routines. I'm sure that many people have felt like I worked so hard to get my routine going, and then the pandemic hit and we're all in quarantine, and all of a sudden the routines are shattered. And those external routines can be so critical for kind of cueing our minds. Okay, it's time to go to campus. That means I'm going to need to be more focused once I get there. And just the process of leaving your house and going to campus can really get your brain kind of primed and ready to learn. Whereas now it might be, okay, you leave your kitchen, breakfast is over, you move to your couch, time to take a class. And that can be a lot harder for us to be like cognitively present and ready to learn. So it's important to try to balance flexibility with structure, right? I kind of love this photo here that is of a cat lying on top of a person who is lying on their couch doing work on their laptop. It's this, we're trying to implement structure, we're trying to get work done, we're also trying to have some more ease in our lives, have a bit of flexibility. And so really needing to ask yourself, how much flexibility is enough? How much structure is enough? For some folks, they need a lot of structure. The more structure, the more motivated, the more focused they might be. For other people, there might be kind of a threshold where too much structure actually kind of, our brains almost revolt in some way and say, no, I don't want to follow all those rules. I don't want to do all those things. And so asking yourself, how much is enough? Maybe it's that you have your morning routine that is really flexible. You give yourself 1 hour or 2 hours to get up, go at your own pace, have a leisure breakfast, drink some coffee on the couch, whatever it is that you like doing in the morning. And you keep that really flexible. You can change up the order of things in the morning. You can do that however you like each day. But then you have time to, okay, now it's getting to 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or noon, whatever it is, time to get into the work zone. How do you create more structure so that your work time is more structured? That's going to really help get you more motivated. And I like to talk about what I call transitional activities. And so if you're moving from your flexible morning routine into work, what do you need to do, again, to kind of cue your mind to say, okay, it's time to get into the zone. So sometimes a really great one can be sitting down, looking over your to-do lists, looking over your calendar for the week, something like planning oriented, thinking about all the things you have to do, and then picking one and doing it. For other folks, it's I need to go for a 5-minute walk outside, let myself transition. Once I come inside, I take off my shoes, I sit down, and I get going. Whatever that transitional activity looks like for you, you can try out different things, but that can really help move from that more flexible time into that more structured time. And then the same thing, moving from that structured time out of that into a more flexible time. Maybe you keep your evening routine really flexible. Whatever that looks like, you can use external cues like lighting or music or clothes to help you transition, to help you know that you're in a different space, even if you haven't physically changed your space, right? And so, for example, for me in the mornings, once I keep the lights off, I just use daylight. And then once it's time to get going on work, I turn the lights on, and that kind of is an external cue. I know someone mentioned in the last workshop, they turn the light on at their desk, the lamp on, and when that lamp's on, everyone knows that that person is working and they leave them alone. It also kind of helps that person stay focused during that time. Clothes. So I talked to a student who said that they have their, evening pajamas, then they have their daytime pajamas, and their relaxing pajamas, so that they can, even if you're not wanting to get into kind of more work clothes or something that you might have been more used to going onto campus, or just, getting dressed in regular outfits. If you want to stay more comfortable during this time, enjoy that silver lining piece of this whole thing, maybe you could still change and tell yourself, okay, now this is my still comfortable outfit, but my work outfit. Those external cues can actually make a really big difference. So blocking off that work time, like I mentioned, ask yourself, how many hours do you need? Make sure you give yourself that buffer time for those transitions into that work time and out of that work time, and see if you can have a little bit of consistency around that, if possible. I know your class schedules change and all of that, but if there's a way to know, okay, I'm going to do 2 hours or 3 hours or 1 hour of work each day in between these classes or right after the class. I use the class as a transitional activity. Then right after that, I just go ahead and get all of my work done. Think about how much time you need and really try to allow just a little bit more than you might think to actually get into the zone. Consistency plus novelty. It's really helpful if we can have our routines be as consistent as possible. That gives us that external structure like we've talked about, and really makes it easier to get motivated, get started. But we still need novelty. A lot of us still really need novelty. If it starts to feel the same every single day, we kind of zone out. We're like, oh, I don't really enjoy that as much. And so give yourself some novelty, whether that's, one day you work at this space, the next day you set up this other space for work, or it's that in those more flexible parts of your day, you do something really different, you play music, whatever, to make it feel fresh each time. It'll help your routines last longer. This is variable for each person. Figure out what works for you, but just try to think about that. How much consistency do you need with how much novelty or introduction of something new in your routine to keep it fresh and consistent? It actually helps it become more consistent over time. And use those transitional activities. Take breaks. This is so critical. For some people, they might just need a 5-minute break, and that's sufficient. They just need to stand up, maybe stretch, go to the restroom, do a little bit of movement, maybe even just open the door, open the window, walk outside, breathe some fresh air, let alone go for a quick walk, something like that, if that's accessible to you. But try to take breaks. Ask yourself, how much time do I really need? Is 5 minutes enough? Do I need 20 minutes? Does that change based on what type of work I'm doing? And right before you take a break, write a note to yourself. So if you're reading in your textbook, see if you can take a sticky note and write a note to yourself. This is exactly what I was thinking. This is where my mind was at right before I took the break. And make it kind of detailed. If you're writing a paper, take that sticky note and stick it on your laptop. This is exactly what I was playing with in my mind. These were the ideas that were going through my mind. Write them down, be specific, so that you can walk away, you can take your break. But when you come back, oftentimes we're like, oh, what was I even thinking about? And then it can be really hard to get back into that zone. If we have this specific sticky note of what we were thinking, where our mindset was, it might be easier to get right back into that mindset and jump back into the work. Try that out, see if it works for you. Set timers. Maybe you've already tried this, but if not, it can be really helpful. I set a timer for, okay, I'm going to do 45 minutes worth of work or whatever it is. And then I have a timer on my phone for at that 45-minute mark, I need to get up and walk around for a moment. But I definitely try to make that alarm on my phone, like I'll put it on a different side of the room so that I can't just turn it off immediately and not take that break. There's sometimes we need flexibility around this. Sometimes we finally got into the zone and you just need to stay in the zone. Of course, do whatever you need, what works for you. But what we're trying to avoid is just never taking any breaks and thinking that's going to help us be more productive. But in the end, actually, we might burn out, our minds might get tired, our body might become really uncomfortable. Maybe we even feel more pain from sitting so much, whatever it might be. So taking those breaks is going to make all of this a bit more sustainable over time. Like I said, get outside whenever possible, whether that is even just opening the window and breathing that fresh air, moving your body to whatever extent is accessible for you, and maybe practicing some grounding techniques where you focus on some objects in your environment and try to get yourself really present, or you focus on how your feet feel on the ground and really almost trace the outside of your feet where you feel the pressure on the ground. That can help you get really, really present. Sometimes that's helpful right before doing work. A lot of times that can be helpful right afterwards before we move into the rest of our day. Especially during quarantine, it can feel like all days blurred together. During the day, the morning, afternoon, and evening is all just blurred together. And so if we can do something to get us really present and allow ourselves to break up the day a bit more in a way that feels a bit healthier or a bit more comfortable or less of a blur, that can kind of feel a bit depressing over time when everything is just blurring together. So see if you can try those out. Time management. Now, these are strategies that we can take with us, not just during this time, but at any point during our academic careers and even beyond, right? So just a reminder, we are not at our optimal level of functioning. I could say that so many times. It's hard to remind ourselves of that and have that compassion. I just want to name that it is so understandable that motivation and productivity are low right now. At a certain point, I just kind of had to tell myself, this is just not going to be my best term by any means. I'm just going to do the best that I can with what I've got right now. This feels really difficult. There's the pandemic. A lot of people are facing additional challenges, whether they're related or unrelated to the pandemic. I wish that there was a way that we could submit an assignment or submit an exam and say assignment completed under time of pandemic, right? Or whatever that contextual factor is for you now or at any point in the future. And hopefully instructors are being more understanding during this time. It also might require a bit of advocacy. And if nothing else, just some self-compassion when you're working with yourself, trying to get things done, understanding like, of course my motivation's low. I haven't left my home, or I haven't gotten to see people and get that energy from other people in person. So that is just so important right now. There's another workshop on self-compassion that I encourage you all to check out through the AEC. We still need to get some work done. So even with all of this, even with the context, we still need to get through these classes and get our work done, right? And so how do we do that? Schedule time to schedule time. This is what I always say. So it might be one time each day or one time each week, but see if you can sit down, get into your workspace, and look at all the different things that you need to do either that day or that week, however often you're doing this. So you have to really set aside time that you will use for planning specifically. So you got to block that off in your calendar. I like to use this as a transitional activity. And so if I have a really hard time getting started on Sundays, for example, I will sit down and look at all of my syllabi and write down to-do lists. I set aside that time, you know, Sunday at 11 a.m., whatever it is. I set aside 30 minutes, however long you need, and really try to work through, okay, what are all the upcoming things? Then I plug them into my calendar for that week. I plug in times that I'm going to work on them. And that can really help me start getting motivated, maybe even introduces a little bit of anxiety where I'm like, oh, wow, I need to get all these things done. And that helps me actually get started. I pick one thing and I get started on it. So schedule time to schedule time, and try to do it during a time that you're actually going to be able to follow through. So that you don't pick a time that, oh, you know, that's too close to class, I'm not actually going to do it, or, oh, my brain is burnt out by that hour in the day. So try to be thoughtful about when you do this, but definitely plug it into your computer and try to be consistent with it. So create to-do lists, lots of them. I like to encourage students to try out different combinations of this and see what works for you. First, starting with just a really broad general to-do list, you just kind of throw everything out of your brain that you're thinking of that you need to do onto paper. Maybe you look through all your syllabi, like I was just naming, and you just put everything down that's coming up for that week. But very broad. It can be stuff related to school, work, personal life, all of it, just put it onto paper. Then that can't be our only to-do list, right? Because for many of us, that'll feel really overwhelming, not organized. And so then we can take a second to-do list, maybe even just a second part of that piece of paper, or electronic to-do list, however you like to do it. And maybe we make it categorized. So I'm going to organize this by each class and what I have to do for each class. Or I'm going to organize this by, these are all my work things, these are all my school related things, these are all my personal things. We can also prioritize the to-do list. So we can either skip over the categorized part, or based on the categorized part, still prioritize what's one task in each of those different sections that I really need to get done first. Or it could be what's due first. Maybe you put due dates in there. And then just try to get really, really specific. So I really do use 3 different to-do lists when I sit down and I have scheduled time to schedule time. When I'm sitting down to plan, I do this broader to-do list, then I categorize it, and then I pick one thing and really try to prioritize from each section. Then in the end, I pick one, like I mentioned, and I get started. If we allow ourselves to bounce around a whole lot between the different things, there can be some benefits to that, but oftentimes it can leave us not actually completing any one of those things. And then you don't get the satisfaction of checking that thing off, scratching it off, which I also encourage you to do. That's why I like the written ones, because I feel like it's really satisfying to scratch it off, and kind of give myself that pat on the back of like, you did it, you did the thing, nice work. And so, like I said, you can try this out as a transitional activity and see if that's helpful for you. Break it down into very small, manageable steps. We avoid and procrastinate for a reason. Maybe it is the fact that, you know, writing has always been so challenging, writing essays. And so when you sit down, you think about writing this 20-page paper, you're like, there's no way, I can't do this. This has always ended in tears. It's so difficult for me. And so of course you're going to procrastinate. You're going to put that off. Your brain is like, no way, do not want to do that thing. And so kind of having some understanding around that, some self-awareness around that, so that we can almost change that narrative a little bit. Okay, I know this thing has been really hard for me in the past. How can I break this down to make it more doable? And so rather than thinking of it as a 20-page paper, maybe we say, okay, what are each of the different sections? I need the introduction. I need these 3 paragraphs about these 3 specific topics, and the conclusion. Okay, about how many pages do I think more or less I need for each section? 2 pages here, 3 pages there, 4, 3 pages, however you want to break it up. And then when we focus in on each single section, it's like, rather than saying I have to write this 20-page paper, he's like, I just have to write these 2 to 3 pages on this topic. That's my mission for today or for this week, however you break it up. that's going to be so much less overwhelming, and that procrastination might kind of come down a bit. We might be able to move towards that task a little bit more when it feels doable, right? And so breaking it down is so helpful for that. We don't feel like we have to do the whole thing. We feel like we can just focus on one task. Then when you get through those 3 pages, you complete that section of it, you need to really, or what I like to do is really try to give myself credit for that. Name it. You're like, wow, that was awesome. I did that. I did a good job of it. So that we can try to rewrite that story later when we're approaching the next 20-page paper. We're like, wow, I was more successful when I broke it down. I was able to get through those parts. That's going to help motivate us moving forward. Start small. For some people, it's great to start with the easiest task. Again, to kind of it's like a train getting going, like, right? We need to start with something small and easy. We start building that momentum, and then we get to really build off of that and start getting going, and really dive into the task and get a lot of work done. And so for some people, it might be starting with something easy. For other people, it might be, what's the most interesting thing? What does my brain feel like focusing on right now? And that can be a great place to start. Some people like to start with the most difficult thing to get it out of the way, or they know it'll take the most time. Whatever works for you, try out some different things and see. Maybe for different types of classes, it might look different, but try to do those things and actually notice what works for you. Be as realistic as possible. This part is really hard. We can be really optimistic about how much we think we can get done within a certain amount of time, what goals actually are attainable. So rather than saying, I'm going to write this 20-page paper within a 24-hour period, for me, that is not realistic. For some people, you dominate doing it that way with procrastination. But for me, that's not realistic. And so I need to say, okay, I need to dedicate, in a week in advance, I need to dedicate, 4 hours a day or 2 hours a day, or on these certain days, however you break it up. And then I tell myself, not just work on paper. I put in my calendar specifically what I'm going to work on. Work on introduction, do your lit review, find sources. And so on each of those days, I know really specifically what I'm working on. Being concrete and specific is also going to allow you to check things off of your list more, which can be really motivating, like we talked about. Schedule when to work on each task, like I was just naming. Pick a time when you can actually do it. That's a part of being realistic. When your brain will actually be awake or alert enough. Think about whether you're more of a morning work person or an afternoon, evening work person, and actually schedule time during times where you will be home, which now is very, very often, if not all the time. But in the future, you can still use these strategies and make sure it's when you can actually have time to sit down and do that thing. Set realistic start and end times for each task. Give yourself enough time. So you can say, okay, I'm going to start at noon. I'm going to work from noon to 4. It helps tell your brain, like, there is an end in sight. We will stop at this time, and try to see if you can actually get yourself to stop at that time. But that can be very, very helpful for getting motivated, getting started. If you do that pretty consistently, your brain, your emotionally are going to feel like, okay, I know I started this time. I know that I actually ended this time. It feels less overwhelming. And be sure to add some buffer times, because at least for me, it takes me a while to transition into that task, like we mentioned earlier. And I need to, if we're not in quarantine, I need to think about how much time it actually takes me to get to the place I'm going to. I don't usually calculate that in. Maybe buffer time within our own home looks like, okay, it takes me a minute to settle in, get comfortable, pull up all of the different things that I need to be looking at while I work on this assignment. And so give yourself that 15-minute buffer time to kind of get yourself set up before you actually do your work. So add that on to the amount of time you need to actually work. If I need 4 hours, I know I need to add in 15 to 30 minutes before and 15 to 30 minutes after to transition in and then transition out afterwards. Use technology, use those electronic reminders. Set the reminder right away. When you think of the thing, okay, I really need to do this thing on Monday, set that reminder as quickly as possible in the moment so that you don't forget to remind yourself, right? That happens all the time. And just be careful, be aware what works for you. Too many alarms or reminders, sometimes we tend to just ignore them or swipe them off of our screen really easily. And so I'm incredibly selective of which reminders I use that actually have an alert or pop up on my phone versus like have a noise that comes up. That way, when it does really pop up on my phone or has a noise, I know it's actually something very important I need to pay attention to. So I minimize all the other things. I don't have my emails or other things give me reminders, so that the reminders are really specific to the tasks that I need to remember to do at those times. So screen fatigue. This is very real. Our poor eyes can just feel incredibly drained, exhausted, achy, dry. And so protecting your eyes is a really important thing to do. Blue light blocker glasses can be very helpful. There are some affordable ones that I've seen online, and they really protect your eyes from the blue light from the screen. And for me, I've noticed that it can really help me wind down after doing work. I feel like there's less strain on my eyes. I noticed that my eyes weren't as dry afterwards. If you have glasses and you don't use them often, I encourage you to use them to help protect your eyes during this time. There's a strategy that I've heard before from a medical provider about trying to reduce dry eyes by blinking or looking away from your screen. So we're constantly, if we're doing this, we're constantly looking at a screen that's close to us. So if you can take a break, look away at the thing farthest away from you that you can see. For me, it's out the window at a tree, and then look away for 3 to 5 seconds, close your eyes for 3 to 5 seconds, squint your eyes like tight, shut them tight together for 3 to 5 seconds, and then focus again on something far away, and kind of go through that 2 or 3 or even 5 times. And that can help naturally produce more moisture in your eyes. It can also help with that focus, so that we're not always looking at something and focusing on something really close to us. We're also giving our eyes a break and looking at something farther away. Dimming your screen. So if you even noticed that the background of this screen is a little bit more of a yellowish shade, just feels softer. You can dim your screen just with lighting on your computer. You can also use nighttime mode. Many computers have that as an option. It could come on automatically at a certain time and kind of yellows your screen a little bit. There's also an app called Flux and some other apps that you can download to then it'll do this to your screen and help everything become more yellow. And so those are just some options if you're using your eyes for all of the work that you're doing, trying to take care of them in the process. And trying out alternative formats. So if there's any type of activity or task or assignment that you can do, not staring at the screen, I encourage you to give yourself a break. So if there are audiobook options, text to speech is an option. If you're registered through the Accessible Education Center, there are support services around that for you. Using e-readers, trying to maybe move around if that's accessible to you while you're listening. Maybe it's lying on the floor, maybe it's just doing something with your arms to just move a bit. But maybe take advantage of that time where you don't have to be staring at something, you could be moving. Some folks, it's really helpful to listen and read along. So whatever works for you. Adobe has something called Speechify, which is a free PDF reader. You can check that out so that it takes your PDFs and actually reads them out loud to you. And again, there's some accommodations through the AAC if you're registered and if those accommodations apply to you. And just finding balance. Think about for yourself, what activities do you enjoy that do not involve screens? Maybe it's reading a physical book, walking or moving, again, if that's accessible, crafts, something hands-on, a fun project, that thing you've been meaning to do, a puzzle. For me, I have to be really thoughtful about when I do these activities because they can really pull me away from the work I need to be doing. So I might give myself more of that during the weekends and less of that during the weekdays, or I kind of put boundaries around it. I can work on this craft project for 1 hour or 2 hours, whatever, but then I have to transition or use it as a reward. I finished work, I shut off my computer and I do something hands-on that doesn't require a screen. Listening to music is another really nice one that can be refreshing. And again, if that's accessible, it can help you kind of disconnect from the work that you're doing. So we have some resources that we want to share with you all. The Accessible Education Center, there's the website and phone number on here. We have the TAEC, the Tutoring and Academic Engagement Center. The website's on there. They have some wonderful workshops as well. There's always UO Academic Advising if you need to connect with your advisor about your course load or anything particularly relevant to what we're dealing with right now with the pandemic. And there are some workshops. A few of these have passed already, but the ones that are later on in May are still coming up. So self-compassion in times of uncertainty. These are through the AEC and a similar format on Zoom. That one I really encourage you to check out because it gives you some great strategies on how to really take care of yourself during these times. And those are skills that we can use all of the time, right? And then another workshop is the art of fishing, how to get the answers you need. So really learning how to advocate for yourself and access, get your needs met and access the resources and tools that you need to successfully navigate school. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email me or contact the Accessible Education Center.